Joining me from the Uber blog, Hullabaloo. And I'm so proud that I think 2014 was the year that I actually learned to pronounce that blog. She's got a fundraiser going on right now, folks. I want to encourage everybody to head over to digbysblog.blogspot.com. We'll put a link, of course, at majority.fm. The proprietor of said blog, Digby. Welcome back to the program, Digby.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sam.
So this is our final new interview, I guess. We're obviously doing some best ofs next week, but new interview for 2014. So I wanted to look back on the year and sort of, I guess, anticipate what 2015 is going to be like. 2015 should be a bizarre year because it's going to be the sort of the ramping up of the 2016 presidential elections, but also it's the first year that President Obama, that we will have we will have a Senate that is, or I should say, Republicans will be in control of both houses of Congress. But before we get to that, let's look back on this past year. It was much of the same, it seems to me, frankly, in terms of legislatively. Some of the big stuff for me was sort of, I guess, around sort of reopening the old wounds of torture this year.
Well, certainly we seem to come up on that at the end of the year where it kind of hit with a bang with this Senate report. I mean, people like you and I have been following that story for a very long time, and there wasn't actually a lot of new information, but it's always a little different when instead of having to piece together years worth of newspaper reports, an official government document puts it all together, and including, and they laid out the narrative in a way that I think a lot of people hadn't seen it before, and it was certainly a big reminder to those of us who've been following it about just what a horrifying policy that was, and a reminder that by allowing it to be swept under the rug the way that it was, I mean, it's out there, but it has gone unanswered with any kind of punishment, without even any kind of, people weren't even fired. In fact, John Brennan is still running the place.
And Rodriguez is also been promoted as well.
That's right. And so the lesson of all of it, kind of, I think that's what really came to a head here in this past month, was the fact that torture is now where it is a debate at all. And if you look at the opinion polls, over half of the American public say, it's okay, I can deal with that. Where it's a debate at all, it's now a partisan issue. It's just another issue to be haggled about, like, I don't know, the capital gains tax or something.
Right.
And it is no longer an issue where the automatic response would always be, oh my God, no, of course we don't torture. I think that's the subtle shift that's happened, that even during the Bush administration, they said, we don't torture.
Right.
But, what you say, this isn't torture because we don't do that because torture is wrong. What I sensed in this last month was a shift to torture is not wrong.
Well, Brennan himself, when asked the question, will we do this in the future, he was like, well,
yep.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
we serve at the pleasure of the president.
Right.
It depends on the circumstances, which indicates that this is no longer just, a taboo off the table. We've got to lie our way out of this. I mean, they're not even trying anymore. It's been normalized to the point where they can say legitimately, we're of the group that thinks torture is a useful and righteous policy, and we believe that it's a good thing to do. And that really is a big change. I mean, I think the American government over time has probably done a fair amment of torturing.
Oh, right.
But I don't think we've ever
as a policy said
that it's okay.
Right. I mean, and that's, this is not about splitting hairs here. I mean, I think, our country has, and any country and any institution, I think, and people, frankly, all operate, I think, on some level. They set certain ideals and work towards that. Except for those who I think are sort of the sickest amongst us in terms of a lot of the morality. Espousers tend to have some rather big problems they're trying to compensate for. But particularly in terms of institutions, you set these ideals, and when you, as a nation, accept on a policy level of torture, then it's really not about like the clicking, the ticking time bomb or anything like this.
Right.
It really is just simply, like you say, it's just another political issue to be hammered out. Some terms we may not have torture, some we may, et cetera, et cetera. But that I think is stunning. And the other thing that I think is really clear too, that really became clear to me this year, was just how powerful the CIA is. I mean, it was just, I think yesterday, or we're recording this earlier in the week, but it was this week where the accountability, and that's the name of it, the accountability committee of the CIA has determined that basically overruled their own inspector general and said there was really nothing wrong with us spying on the Senate. What that indicates to me is like, this is really, the tail is wagging the dog here, right, with the CIA. I mean, maybe I've been naive, but it really is clear to me that the CIA is it can't go rogue because it seems to have been built to be rogue.
Well, I think that's true. I wrote about that as well. I was stunned to see that sort of in the middle of a story in the New York Times. Kind of the CIA says, we didn't do anything wrong, and what the hell are you going to do about it? And the Senate kind of, I guess they just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, we tried. I mean, that's pretty shocking. Now, I'm not one who's going to sit here and say, well, the worst crime that was committed was the crime against the Senate, because that's just not true. The worst crime that was committed was the actual torture. However, it is a very telling thing that the CIA is operating completely with impunity. I mean, there is clearly nothing that they cannot get away with or believe they can't get away with, and we have no reason to believe that there will be any consequences for this. I mean, look at the White House, which, Barack Obama ran for office saying, very righteously condemning torture, saying this is not who we are. And upon taking office, he did start to use that weird little language tick that they all do, America doesn't torture, not addressing the fact, did we torture? Are we going to torture? But right at this particular moment, I'm saying this, we are not torturing. So you could tell that he had been advised by, whomever in the intelligence community that he had to be careful with his language. But nonetheless, the fact that when the torture report came out and everybody was, they fought it, every step of the way. The White House did. They were up there redacting everything they could possibly redact. But they couldn't hold it back. I mean, I think that at some point or another, I think probably President Obama looked at his legacy as being the guy who, deep sixed the torture report. Maybe that wasn't something he really wanted on his tombstone. But when it was released, the White House refused to take a position. They just said, well, look,
Yeah, it was basically a McCullough, right?
Yeah.
Where, we let the grand jury take a look at it, and, there's no point in us weighing in.
Exactly. I hadn't thought of that parallel, but it's perfect. It's sort of this, well, it's all out there now. You decide, and we're not going to take a position on that. So, there's something very substantial shifted with this whole debate, something really important. And I have to just add one little thing. This probably is no accident that Dick Cheney chose the method he chose to do this. One of his main purposes when he got back into government was to restore the executive branch power to what he determined to be its former glory. And a lot of his problem with the executive power being diminished came from his time during the Nixon and Ford years, where he felt that, the Congress was far too uppity and had, assumed way too much power. So I think by having the Justice Department issue these orders, what he did was, I mean, he created this new world where there's a get out of jail free card as long as some lawyer in some department somewhere said it was okay.
Right.
Now, nobody has any responsibility as long as they got somebody in there who signed a memo that said it's legal, whatever it is you want to do. That's some scary stuff there. I mean, where does that end? I mean, if that is now a legitimate excuse for anything that a member of the government does, there's really no end to it, because you can always find a lawyer to write a memo, right? I mean,
of course, and this is, the whole thing I find is just what's really sort of, I guess, even more disturbing about all of it, as you pull out, is just that there doesn't seem to be. I mean, what would it take at this point for there ever to be another church committee? And which is not to say, and in retrospect too, it looks like, well, that was, I don't know if it was largely window dressing or in terms of its sustainable impact. It didn't lock in stuff to the extent that it should have. I mean, we've seen these abuses with the FISA court, et cetera, et cetera. But it really does make me feel. And I guess it's really, the Senate thing, them spying on the Senate, as far as I'm concerned, I would love them to release pictures of Dianne Feinstein at home. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't. What is amazing to me is that even with their own sort of like institutional, someone like Dianne Feinstein, the one motivating factor you can imagine that she has is sort of to maintain her own sense of the prominence of her position as a senator. And, Leahy got on and said her speech was the most important he's heard on the Senate floor in his history of being in the Senate, which I think is, maybe as long as, half of my life, maybe more. And it just gives me a sense that there is just such a deep embedded, of the deep state on some level when it comes to national security, that it's extremely troublesome. I mean, because the last real, the last president that seemed to have had, or not, maybe not the last, but certainly, there's some reports that Kennedy was really at loggerheads with his CIA, and that it really wasn't his CIA, and that this type of stuff is very disturbing. That there's going to be not only no punishment, but we're talking about two guys, one tenant who got a medal and the other one who just got a promotion. And it just seems stunning to me that there's that lack of accountability.
And
and the American public does not care. If anything, they're on the other side of this issue.
Yeah. I mean, where they get, for all the anti-government propaganda that the right has spent decades promulgating to try and get people to mistrust the government, for some unknown reason, when it comes to this stuff, everybody's just, I think they probably know what they're doing. And I will never understand it. It's like opposite world as far as I'm concerned. I actually think that the IRS probably, it's a bunch of bureaucratic clerks sitting there filling out, forms all day long. And they have a lot of access to very important information, but for whatever reason, I don't see them as being the same level of kind of enemy that I feel that the CIA and the NSA and all these intelligence agencies who operate in complete secrecy and seem to operate with total impunity. It's very disturbing, and I think it makes you wonder what happens when a president gets elected. And, they always say this, well, they bring him into the room and then they lay out all the threats, and then suddenly that peacenik, he turns into a hawk overnight because he sees how dangerous a world it is. What if it isn't that? What if that's not what they lay out for the president? You know what I mean?
Well,
maybe.
I don't want to drift off into too deep territory here, but I'm quite convinced, that President Obama gets in there and the CIA comes in and says, look, we do things for you that you need to have done at a certain point. And the flip side of that is that you can't tell us really what to do.
Yeah.
And you know, when we talk about the difference between an IRS and, let's say, a CIA or an NSA, the danger, it seems to me, is not just that the CIA, you know, a COINTELPRO type of situation, that it's going to chill dissent. It's also that it leads us into pretty bad situations, like massive wars or like ongoing conflicts. I mean, if you look back at the CIA's greatest hits, almost every great enemy that we have now, which dictates our foreign policy, which dictates the way that we spend, tends to be a function of stuff that they did. And I'm not quite convinced that it was all at the behest of policymakers as much as sort of some type of feedback loop that you need to do this because we're a self-licking ice cream cone type of situation.
Right.
You know, I mean, you got to get rid of you got to install the Shah, or you got to get rid of Allende, or we've got to run weapons down to Central America, or there's a war in Iraq. I mean, all of these things have led us down the path of, at the very least, not only killing tens of hundreds of thousands of innocent people, but also, expended our resources and created a dynamic in the world that, at the end of the day, does not necessarily behoove us as citizens, in my opinion.
Yeah, and no kidding. And look at the success rate, or should I say the lack of success rate. I mean, these people, for all of their power and the fact that they seem to be able to, they're on some level kind of running American foreign policy through this idea of creating deniability for the people who are actually accountable to the people, that they're not very good at it.
Right.
I mean, they make mistake after mistake after mistake. I mean, they never see it coming. And they are involving
Berlin Wall, 9/11. Half of the stuff that went on during the Middle East Spring. I mean, there's not a lot that they seem to be offering. ISIS, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
I mean, for all their power and the fact that they have this unlimited, sort of a mandate, or at least, seem to be able to seize that mandate if they feel like it. I don't see that they've done us a whole lot of good. I mean, I guess they would say, well, you don't see it because it's secret, and
right.
It'd be a lot worse if it weren't for us. But again, we're kind of taking their word for it. The things that we can see are not, I don't see them as being a particularly effective agency. And in fact, all you have to, just the one thing alone of the Iraq War, that alone, their participation in that, their willingness to go with that, and to provide what was necessary to justify a war against that country and everything that's fallen out since then, to me, everybody should have been fired for that alone. And yet that nobody was fired. Literally nobody has ever been fired for these mistakes.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. They all just carry on like nothing, because they are patriots who are doing their best to, protect us. So, if they actually make us less safe, well, we need to thank them for that and move along. It's it's a weird dynamic and very, very scary. And I don't see that anybody wants to, it's like this is one of those things that people just don't want to look at. They don't want to see it. They don't want to know about it. Just
contemplate, like if these guys worked at Denny's, they would have been long gone from their job.
You think so?
That has been sort of, I think, the year in that torture report, because I guess it was like in March maybe that Feinstein gave that speech, or maybe sometime in spring, I can't remember. That has just been quite stunning to me, and it really did look like it was going to come down to the wire, as if President Obama might punt. But maybe somebody just realized, like at the end of the day, this is just a bump in the road.
Yeah.
This is actually this is going to give us some good chops on how we spin a story. It's been a while. So let's see if we can do it.
Yeah.
Getting to the other big theme of 2014, it seems to me, because I think there was obviously a tremendous amount of gridlock, and The Republicans were sort of, I think, on their best behavior in anticipation of the 2014 elections. Well, there were two things that stuck out to me. One being, and I'll get to the political one in a second because that has to do with wealth inequality. But the other sort of, I think, big. I mean, this year it seems to me is that has really, I think, captured the attention of the body politic to a certain extent has been the relationship, and I don't know why it's taken so long in some way or why this has been. And I'm curious as to if you have a sense of it, because this has obviously been an ongoing. I mean, this has been the story of America in many respects, but this year there was a lot more attention paid to the way that police, particularly in black people. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it was coming on the heel. There's been a lot of activism around stop and frisk in this city and around the country a little bit, and I think so. There was sort of a broader awareness, but I can't imagine that the number of unarmed African Americans killed by police this year has been greater, specifically that much greater than in any other year. It just seems that I don't know if it's a combination of of cell phones or what, or social media where it's just people have organized around it. But it seems like it's getting more attention. Does it feel that way to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think this has been the year where a lot of people sort of noticed and woke up and went, wow. I don't have any idea. I was thinking about this earlier, too. I don't know what it was. I don't know why. I think it started, with the Michael Brown killing, in August. I think, to me, that's kind of the one that really seems like it was the catalyst. But there's been a bunch of things sort of happening. I mean, people like you and I, we follow this stuff all the time. I'm a big, I write a lot about tasers and police abuse and various things. So, it's the kind of thing that I'm always sort of aware of. But there was something about that particular event that, even to people, I think, like me who follow that stuff pretty closely, just, I don't know, it felt like there was something different. And maybe it was the reaction of people in Ferguson, and maybe that's what it took, was a community to react that way and to have the media pay attention the way that it did. I don't know, but I do think that it has awakened the the public to the fact that there's something very, very wrong. And I think it has to do with a sort of understanding that there's something wrong with American policing on a certain level. I mean, to me, the fact that we started talking after Ferguson, and one of the things that I think really struck people was that militarization. And that's not the central issue here, but it does speak to it, which is the idea that the police feel that they are in a combat zone, that they're dealing
Right.
with the enemy. And in many cases, the enemy has a black face. I mean, that's just the way they think about it. I mean, that's how they identify the enemy. And because they are in a war zone, this is how this kind of thing is happening. I think that is sort of an extension of what we were talking about earlier, and the whole militarization of American life since 9/11, and the way that suddenly people are beginning to realize something really has changed. We aren't the same people. Now, that's not to say that the police haven't been, abusing the African American community since forever. I mean, that is obvious. I mean, that's the history of our country. But there's something about this combination, this confluence of events, or maybe just a sort of an awareness happening at the same time, that this kind of authoritarian culture is starting to be a little bit more stark than it was before. Now, again, a lot of people are fine with that. You could see that with Ferguson, too. I mean, some of the polling showed that in the Michael Brown case, that they were, when it was when it was the black witness's word against the white cop, well, who got the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
It was the Eric Garner one where it was on video and people could see what happened, that suddenly there was, I think, then a real moment of clarity.
Well, and I think
Wait a minute.
the amazing thing too, I think, I mean, because obviously, well, I mean, the interesting thing is I think there's more sensitivity to it in terms of the way that policing happens than the torture, because the torture has actually gone the opposite direction. I mean, it's in some ways, I think maybe it's interesting because when you start to break down this stuff, obviously, if you are an African-American person in this country, you're aware of this dynamic and it's something you live in a broader way. So there's no revelation here, I think, in many respects. I mean, I think it's sort of like there is there are different sort of aspects of the of white culture that is becoming more aware of this stuff. And I think what is really striking to people is not just that cops would do this, but I think like the failure of there being a system to address this, in terms of the failure of the grand jury to even say, you should go to trial on this, I think was what really shook people because, we were going back over the past couple of days because of all of what in the wake of the murder of these two police officers in Brooklyn, in '92, police basically rioted on the Brooklyn Bridge in protest, primarily against Dinkins' attempt to bring in a civilian oversight board, and in '92, and that in many respects ushered in Rudy Giuliani, right? Giuliani was speaking at that rally, I think, and basically said that, Dinkins is bullshit. But I think it's a different time now. And I think both things have changed demographically in this country. Things have changed in terms of crime in this country. And there's different theories as to why that's the case. I happen to be one of those proponents of the lead theory myself, but it's a different era. And the police, I don't think people are prepared to give them the same carte blanche. And that means there has to be mechanisms in society that hold them to account to be professional. And we're seeing anything but professionalism from them, or at least some of their leadership.
Well, oh my God! I mean, this is something that I'm finding absolutely amazing. I mean, the reaction of police to the criticism that they're getting. I mean, I get it. They're human beings. They don't want to be criticized. They feel like they're under siege. They have a tough job. They feel like all of this is unfair. I get it, and I as a fellow human being, I am sympathetic to their position. But the reaction of their police unions, of various spokespeople, of people in law enforcement in general, has been absolutely appalling. They are behaving like spoiled children. They're supposed to be professionals. These are people that really, these are people who should be above that kind of thing. They should be out there saying, look, we're doing our jobs, so we're doing what we have to do. We're going to let the system speak. With the justice system, we'll be in charge of this. This kind of acting out the stuff they said, that they came out with in New York about, Mayor de Blasio has blood on his hands and all of this. I mean, that was absolutely outrageous. The same thing with McCulloch down there in Ferguson, the prosecutor, who basically threw up his hands and said, nothing I can do, and the police have a tough job, so I just put every liar that walked in off the street in front of the grand jury and let the grand jury decide. I mean, this kind of behavior. I mean, in his case, it was kind of petulant, and he was doing his Pontius Pilate routine, I guess. I wash my hands of this. And the police union in Cleveland coming out after the Tamir Rice shooting,
right,
and being angry at the football team because they had criticized the cops. I mean, all of this it's just really outrageous. If what they're looking for is respect, this is the last way they're going to get it from the people, because you look at this and go, these people are behaving like hysterical children. And they're carrying guns. They have a tremendous amount of authority over all of us. And I find it very frightening to think that these people who are, staging these little hissy fits, like turning their back on the mayor, these aren't people I feel that they're making the point. Let me just say that of the protesters.
Yeah,
that
indeed.
These are people who do not have control of their emotions and don't know how to behave with authority.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is the point, right? Is that if you pull up on this 12-year-old kid in Tamir Rice and you're firing as you come out of the door before there's any time to really establish whether or not there's a threat, it's a question as to whether or not you will have the proper mindset to have this responsibility. If you're coming out there when you're being criticized and you're saying like, the fact that the mayor did not give us the license to go and beat the heads of these protesters, maybe next time somebody calls in a crime being committed, maybe we won't be there. I mean, this is really scary stuff that they're even that they're articulating this stuff. And it makes me a lot more worried that the problem is just a broader cultural problem within the police department here. And I mean, I think it may be sort of a naive thing for me to say, but it, if this is the kind of representation they still want, it's very problematic. I just find it shocking. And
well, I mean, let me just go back to our previous conversation once again. This is the same excuse that the CIA uses. And the NSA as well. Well, see, you're going to make us all afraid to do our jobs.
Right.
And then, maybe one day we come to work and we see something and we're not going to be quite as willing to go out on a limb because we're afraid of your criticism. So we won't do it anymore. It's like nice little country you've got here. Be ashamed if anything happened to it. And that's sort of what the cops are doing, too. It's a threat, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like, they're like saying, hey, if you keep criticizing us, we're not going to do our job. Well, that should be a firing offense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is America. What are you talking about? You don't get to do that. The minute you say that, that means that you have shown that you're not capable of doing this job. If you can't even take criticism, and not only that you threaten to withhold, the protection that you are
right. Hand in your badge
with.
and your gun if you can't do your job.
Exactly. Get out. We'll find people who can. I mean, this is insane. But so when you say it's a broader cultural thing within the police department, I mean, I would suggest maybe it's a broader cultural thing within our culture.
Right.
That we're, that this sort of authoritarian mindset, which is we're above criticism. If you try and criticize us, we'll make you pay. What is that? I mean, that's not freedom and liberty, I don't think.
No,
it's kind of outrageous as far as I'm concerned. I mean, and I think that is what, maybe there's a sense somewhere, and I don't think it's very well defined. I think it's kind of an inchoate feeling that people have that something's going wrong in that area, that, and maybe it's just a feeling that the police, the authorities, however you define that, aren't very good.
Right.
They're not the kind of people that we thought they were, which were people of good character and, generally speaking, were people who were, for the most part, understood what their job was and were dedicated to doing it. And in return, by the way, I'm all for giving cops tremendous amounts of perks. I think they get the early retirement. I have no problem with paying them big bucks. I think they get everything they need. That's what we give in return. But, we don't give automatic fealty, or we don't say you're never, that they're not, that we can't criticize them. They don't get that. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, they're public servants. They're subject to all of that stuff.
Yeah, this shouldn't come as a surprise when you sign up to be a cop. Like, I never thought this was a controversial position. I never that we would be, I mean, you're part of, a huge linchpin of public policy, and you're not supposed to take any criticism. It's pretty stunning. But all right, well, listen, yeah. I also want to turn just the sort of thing in 2014, and that I think we're going to talk about 2015 as well. And this is turning to more the sort of more banal, transactional type of politics that we see. But at the beginning of the year, we were hearing a lot about inequality. And then the Democrats basically abandoned that for the Koch brothers are really bad. And they got not terribly far with that. And now we are seeing sort of the ascendance of at least of Elizabeth Warren in some ways. I don't know if you have any strong thoughts on the draft Warren campaign or sort of maybe some of the cynicism around the way that people are promoting it or not. I don't know. But it's been helpful at least because at least there seems to me to be a media narrative now that whatever she's talking about has some political salience, and it's being taken seriously, at least to a certain extent. We saw and then alternatively, I'm just laying everything out there and we can go into this, but the Cromnibus, it seems to me, where we had this giveaway to Wall Street, where we had this tripling or quadrupling, or I don't even know how many times more you can give to a political party. There was all sorts of other not just spending issues involved in that Cromnibus, but policy issues that are very problematic. The EPA's Clean Water Act. Truck drivers having to work more, little things like that, which it seems to me are quite relevant and, were poo-pooed in the run-up to the election as to what the implications of giving the Republicans control of both houses. So just give me your sense of what this year and where you think we're going with all this, with this type of politics.
Well, I mean, I think, I just going back to Elizabeth Warren, I think, I don't have strong feelings about what the movement to draft her one way or the other. I mean, I can see certain reasons why that could be good for a number of people and for, movement building and various other things. Elizabeth Warren is a very popular figure on the left end of the Democratic Party. I also do think she's very good. I mean, I think she's the first Democratic politician to come along in a long time who has a gift for speaking to regular people. I don't think she just speaks to the progressives. I think she has the ability to actually reach beyond a bit. And she also is, I think, a person who is adept, and we'll see how this works. This will go into the next Congress and see how this works, because we're going to have a new dynamic with a Republican Senate, on how she manages to build some coalitions within the Senate. There's some reason to believe, based upon what just happened with the Cromnibus, that she thinks that she can find some ways to sort of cherry pick people out of the Republican Party. And I don't know if there are enough of them, but it's a very interesting thing to see, because we just haven't seen that, the kind of, there's a transactional quality to it, and there is some cynicism in it too, because whoever the Republicans are not going to be doing it for the same reasons. So what you see is a sort of politics where it's a politics of expedience to get a certain outcome on particular issues, even
so
if
give me an example of what
derived at for different motives.
Give me an example of what you're talking about in terms of.
Well, I think in this last one, she was talking about the Citigroup issue, the one that she was so known for, and she gave the great speech, where Citigroup basically wrote the legislation and to roll back provisions of Dodd-Frank, in which they had a stake. And she was talking to people on the right who, for completely different reasons, have issues with bailouts of big banks, and see that as a sort of a Tea Party issue. I don't think she's afraid to do that, and you've seen that a little bit in the House. There were some initiatives that were taken by people like Alan Grayson to pick some people on the right who would he could get some amendments on two bills that were sponsored by both right wingers and left wingers for entirely different reasons, but ended up sort of putting pressure on the center. And I guess that's my point. I think that I've always sort of seen, politics in our current era as being, it's not a pendulum so much as a tug of war where you are constantly kind of pulling from either end to keep the center from toppling over. And I think we have seen over the past couple of decades how much the right has benefited by having a strong right wing pulling on it and pulling it ever further to the right. I think that people like Elizabeth Warren can do the same thing on the left, and in a weird way, they can maybe find some equilibrium or provide some equilibrium with the far right, and it's possible that maybe we can at the very least stop the momentum of the right wing going ever further.
Wait, no,
and I think she's very good. I mean, I think she has a message, and I think that the message is one that resonates. I think it's it's an economic message at a time when we need one. I think the Democrats are confident in their position on social issues for the first time in many decades, and I think that it gives them the ability to
go beyond that.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're not having to apologize for a woman's right to choose.
Right.
With that said, obviously it's under assault in specific states, but as a sort of a national narrative, you don't have to apologize for promoting marriage equality, et cetera, et cetera. And so what's interesting is going to be, or what I think, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, I guess, in that regard, with Elizabeth Warren, what happens with fast track, because that to me is going to be the next big issue, like big, hefty issue, where there's going to be an opportunity to create a what do you call it, transpartisan or some type of alliance, or not even alliance per se, but it's going to be an issue where the left and to the extent that we have a far left, the leftiest, that we have, and we do have far right, I believe, are actually going to find some type of common cause in fighting fast track authority, even on the right that goes beyond, President Obama is a Tsarist dictator. It's going to go towards things like, you guys have always been talking about those black helicopters and the one world authority. Well, that's sort of what the TPP is in many respects, these trade agreements. That's going to be really interesting, because that's where you're going to see the center really, the so-called center, really fight against both, fight for this, because this is just the biggest corporatist giveaway. This seems to me to be the golden chalice when it comes to restricting, from a left perspective, the ability of society to regulate these type of things, and from the right's perspective, I guess what they would call sovereignty in some way.
Right. We don't have to have the same motives to achieve the same outcome. And I grant you this kind of a unique approach, because we are pure of heart and we're very righteous about what we believe, and we don't want to throw in with people but that's sort of the essence of legislation. It doesn't have to be in other words, bipartisanship does not have to be a bunch of centrist corporate sellouts shaking hands and doing backroom deals with rich people. That's not the only version of bipartisanship there can be. There can be bipartisanship. The two parties can find, their own reasons to fight that centrist group, and succeed to the benefit of all of us. There are some things that we can find in common as far as goals, and it's going to be very interesting. It seems to me that it's a big power shift. Now, I don't have a great deal of confidence that in this Congress that will be achieved. I think that the center is as powerful as it ever was, and I think that a lot will depend on where President Obama puts his clout, and I think that when it comes to those issues, I think we can feel fairly confident he's going to go he's going to go with the centrist. I have no reason to believe he'll fight the TPP, for instance. Do you? I mean,
no, Obama? No, he's come out and basically said he wants it. I mean,
I don't, and I think that when you put him together with, but
this is going to be a fight against the White House. I mean, no mistake about it. This is going to be a fight against the White House. You're going to stop fast track authority or not. And if you stop fast track authority, you are more or less, I mean, you are 2/3 of the way to killing the TPP, because I think if it starts to see the light of day, there's a reason why they don't want anybody to know what's in it, and to the extent that we know from places like WikiLeaks that there's a reason, because nobody could defend this. Right. I mean, nobody could defend it, and if it's fast track, obviously they won't have to. If it's not fast track, then there'll be time for people to go out and force people to defend a vote in favor of this.
Right. I mean, remember, that's what fast track is. It's so that elected members of Congress can wash their hands of this controversial issue and allow, something to happen without having to actually vote
this is
for
another McCullough moment, right? I'm going to punt it. I'm going to punt it. It's not our business. We just gave them authority to make the decision. If they can push this, I mean, because I think this is going to be the first thing that the president is going to push for, because if you start getting into, maybe you can get away with it as late as August, but come September, if fast track authority becomes and this is one of those times where you just sort of hate yourself for saying this, but please, Ted Cruz, find it somewhere in your demented brain to realize that you could take some advantage. Like, this is all these Republicans in the Senate are going to be looking for this differential, right? Yeah. They're running against each other, and that could end up again being what salvages us from this fast track authority, because one senator needs to make it an issue for their presidential ambitions.
Yeah, and by the way, just if this does come to pass, we as progressives have to gird ourselves against the mainstream media, who are going to start calling, they already are calling Elizabeth Warren the Ted Cruz of the Democratic Party. And we have to not care. We have to not care if they do that. It's not important. And in fact, we know that she's not she's not crazy, and she's not an extremist. But if that's the position that she's holding in the party, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Ted Cruz is a powerful guy.
Right.
And it's okay. She's a big girl. She can handle the criticism. She can take the heat, and we have to be able to take the heat too, and not get caught up in trying to please Ruth Marcus and David Brooks and people like that, and say, oh no, we're not extreme like that. We don't, we're nothing like Ted Cruz. Sure, go ahead, and vote for fast track. You've got to make sure that you understand that this is a tactic, and it is, we are in a new era of congressional politics, and I think that we need to start recognizing that there's some power in that. And if the mainstream media decides to start hurling insults and calling us extremists, don't run from it. Just absorb the blow and keep doing what you're doing, because it's a power game, and we have to be able to. I say we, but and those of us who write about and talk about these, this politics, we can't get defensive. I guess that's what I'm saying. Don't be afraid. Just let Ruth Marcus have her little fit. And,
and it's not like Elizabeth Warren is worried about Massachusetts, right? I mean, that's the thing, is that sticks and stones. Digby, that level of emotional maturity is why you are in the pantheon of writers on the left. Of course, people can also check out your stuff at Salon. And again, I want to remind people, head to Digby's blog.blogspot.com. It's hullabaloo. You could just Google Digby and you will end up there. End of year fundraiser for Digby. Nobody deserves it more. So please, folks, head over there. Digby, you have a, I think we're going to be playing this after Christmas. So I hope you had a happy Christmas, if that's your ilk, or happy holidays. Let's just
whatever.
Say.
I celebrated.
Take it to it, Bill O'Reilly. But Happy New Year if you're one of those type of lefties who celebrate the New Year when the rest of us do. So, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you in 2015.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Sam. Happy New Year to you too.